Thank you all for joining us. And I'll say this while Carolyn is gone. So the group that organized this, we're called East Valley Indivisibles. Some of you are members, but some of you are all new to us, which is wonderful. And we're a progressive activist group. We are located in the San Fernando Valley. We cover districts, California districts 29 and 30 congressional districts. We're also in City Council District 4. And we endorsed Nithya in the primary election for City Council District 4. And she did great, not just because of us, but yes, and she did wonderfully. And we obviously are continuing to support her as we go into the runoff. And one of the things we wanted to do is, because we're all separated, is to obviously, introduce her to people. So that's a little bit what we're doing. We're hosting this meet and greet so people can hear her speak, but also ask her questions. With that in mind, what I'm going to ask folks to do is I'm going to start it off by asking Nithya a question, but then I'm going to ask folks whatever questions they have, if they could put them in the chat, and we'll kind of wrangle them, but we're also happy to have you ask that question, but just to kind of keep some lack of chaos, we will kind of say, hey, could, Marlene or whoever, could you ask this question about blah, 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 and have you ask it if you want to, or we're happy to ask it, whatever works for you guys. So that's essentially our plan. And as I said, people may continue to come in and we'll let them in, but we met Nithya through this process, and we feel that she represents our values as progressive activists. So we were very excited to endorse her in this campaign. And so first, Nithya, I'd just like to ask you to tell us a little bit about who you are and why you decided to run for city council.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Suju, and thank you to everybody in East Valley Indivisibles for organizing this and for giving me, I think it's very hard to not endorse an incumbent. I think I felt very grateful for your support during the primary. I think it meant a lot to us to have it, and we're very grateful to be here in the general, continuing to fight alongside you for building the Los Angeles that we want to see here. To those of you I have not met, I'm going to give a little bit of background to those of you who've heard this way too many times. I apologize. My name is Nithya. I'm an urban planner by training. I have a master's in urban planning from MIT, and I've worked on urban poverty issues for pretty much my whole career, except for 1 year. I worked for many years in India alongside people who were living in slums and informal settlements there, who were fighting for things like running water, toilets, and land rights in an environment which was very inhospitable to accommodating those demands. And I started a nonprofit there that used urban planning tools to support their existing and very powerful advocacy. Here in Los Angeles, I've done a lot of work on homelessness. But right before when I left this job to run for the seat, I actually was the executive director of Time's Up Entertainment. Time's Up was the organization that came out of Me Too organizing or Me Too activism in Hollywood and beyond. And I was the first executive director of the wing of Time's Up that was trying to push entertainment industry workplaces to become safer and more equitable for women of all kinds, but really for all workers. And I did a lot of exciting work there, but my volunteer work and work I had done previously at the city had been on homelessness. And it was my response, it was my kind of interactions with the city on the issue of homelessness that pushed me to think about running. I want to just talk a little bit about the context of homelessness in Los Angeles, because we had some very bleak homeless count numbers come out last Friday. And I think it's worth talking about those on this call. I just did the math right before this call, and I realized that since 2013, which is when our current mayor came into office, our population of those without a home in Los Angeles has gone up by 78%, which is, I mean, it's like, it boggles the mind, it really boggles the mind, those numbers. The most recent homeless count, which came out on Friday, found that there were over 41,000 people living on the streets of Los Angeles, and 66,000 in the county. These are, again, staggeringly huge numbers. And in response to this homelessness crisis, the city and county have responded with something far short of the urgency we need to address the needs of those experiencing homelessness right now. There is a massive gap in services. And this is something that a lot of people who read the news about homelessness often don't understand. We have less than a quarter of the shelter beds that we need for our current homeless population. We had 9,000 people sleeping in their cars last year. We have 250 legal parking spots for them last year, 250. So again, the gap in services is just enormous. In most parts of the city, to this day, even with the increase in spending on services that has happened over the last couple of years through Measure H and Measure HHH, we have almost no showers for people to use, even though many people who are experiencing homelessness actually do have jobs or are in school, especially youth. We have no bathrooms that people are welcome to use. We have no case managers that people can walk into and talk to and ask for support in getting IDs and getting paperwork and moving along the process of getting housed. We just simply do not have that in the majority of this city. This is the system that we've created in response to a crisis that has been present in Los Angeles, has been a very real part of Los Angeles for many, many years. This is not a new issue. And yet, in response to this crisis, we have not created a system that responds to people's needs with any kind of compassion. And the failure to create that system has had really devastating consequences. Over 1,000 people died on the streets of Los Angeles last year, over 3 a day. And this is a consequence of the system that we created. We also, in the absence of a system of outreach workers and social services that is going out to help people, have created a system where the Los Angeles police is the most frequent point of contact between those experiencing homelessness and our government, which has also had deadly consequences. 1 out of 3 police uses of force last year were against people experiencing homelessness here in LA. And I think in the context of our current protests and uprising on police brutality, changing the system, changing the way in which we respond to homelessness has to be an essential element of how we transform our city in response to this. Homelessness is just one part, like the visible tents are just one part of a broader housing crisis that I think everyone can feel in Los Angeles is really transforming LA. We don't see overcrowding, but we know it exists. And it had real impacts when people were more vulnerable to COVID because multiple families were living in single homes, which happens in many, many parts of, many, many neighborhoods and many, many households in Los Angeles. Housing prices have gone through the roof. Housing rents have increased by 67% over the last decade. Renter incomes have not moved, barely moved during that time. And every time the rent goes up by another 5%, studies have shown that another 2,000 people become homeless. This is something that is absolutely transforming who gets to live in Los Angeles. Again, looking at the data, what we see is that those people who are leaving Los Angeles, LA County lost population last year. Those people who are leaving Los Angeles because it is too expensive here are working people and people of color. So last year we lost population and the data shows that the people who left were those making less than $50,000 a year. We've lost our Black population here in Los Angeles. I've talked about this many times. Our Black population here in LA has fallen by 20% over the last 2 decades. While Black residents make up only 9% of our city's population, they make up over 1/3 of our unhoused population, which means that we are experiencing here a housing crisis which is playing out incredibly unequally across residents of Los Angeles. In the primary, I often talked about this by calling it displacement. I called it gentrification. Recently, I read an article that urged all of us to call it what it is, which is racial banishment. And I think it's important to use that terminology as we seek to find solutions for this issue. But you asked, Suju, why I decided to run, and all I've done is describe the context in which I chose to run. The reason I chose to run was because I looked at this issue. I looked at this context, and what I saw was a city here in LA that has an incredible amount of power. City council here is very powerful. We have 250,000 residents in every constituents, in every district. We have 15 council members for a city of 4 million. Each council member is considered to be a kind of a mini mayor. We have a strong council, weak mayor system. So each council member actually has significant amount of control over how we respond to all of the varied issues that the city is grappling with. And in my interactions with the city, when I was doing homeless services work as a volunteer in my neighborhood, when I got to know more of the city, when I worked there briefly, what I saw over and over again were elected representatives that stood in the way of moving towards better responses, that looked away from their significant powers, that when faced with major problems here in Los Angeles would very frequently say, the county needs to act, the governor needs to act, the federal government needs to act, but never once said, here is what I will do to advance a more just Los Angeles, to advance a more sustainable Los Angeles. And I grew incredibly frustrated hearing that response. I think that this frustration has become clearer, or rather this problem that I outlined about our city council members, their incredible power and their unwillingness to use that power to move us towards a better city has become clearer to a much broader range of people over the last few months as our city has grappled with the pandemic and the economic crisis that has resulted from it, and from protests and uprising around police brutality against Black Angelenos, where we've seen that City Hall has stood in the way of justice over and over again. And so here at this moment, I think we have a real opportunity. One of the other reasons that I chose to run at this time was because our federal elections and our municipal elections were overlapping for the first time in Los Angeles in this race. And so we have the potential, we saw it in the primary, we saw it realized in the primary, for an expansion in the electorate, for more people to get engaged, for more people to say in LA that our city doesn't look the way that I want it to look. It doesn't match my values. And so that's the kind of campaign we wanted to run. That is the kind of campaign we ran. That's the kind of campaign we're continuing to run, which is one focused on citizen engagement, of bringing new voters into municipal politics, into educating them about the power of the council. And hopefully what will result is that no matter who is in power after November, that we will have built a very engaged citizenry here that will hold that person accountable. That was a very long answer. Sorry, Suju.
Suju, you're muted.
You're muted, Suju.
You guys got to watch my lips move for a while. That was good. No, sorry. The first question that already came up is a question about the scandal in City Council. You can see over here, it's spread to the Planning Commission. It's business as usual politics. The power the donors, that have over that. So I think it's a sort of a broader question, but focused on what we see as the ongoing scandal in City Council. And maybe give me a little context for that for folks who might not know exactly what's going on at City Council right now.
Yeah, well, I'm happy. Yeah, it's so over the last few months, I don't know, does everybody on this call know that there's been an FBI investigation into multiple council members here in LA? I don't know how much I have to go into the background of this.
Yeah, but I don't feel compelled to give it all, but if that's essentially
how many council members?
So definitely it looks like one sitting council member, Huizar, is under active investigation. There have been other council member staff that have been named in the investigations. and one council member who already left, who has pled guilty already, Mitch Englander, and whose chief of staff, who is now the council member there, who has been named in those investigations, who's a player in whatever happened. And what happened was very unsavory. It's like, it feels like it's like TV. I mean, it's so unsavory. It's involves trips to Los Angeles, bags of cash being given to council members in bathrooms.
Las Vegas, not Los Angeles.
Las Vegas.
Oh, sorry, Las Vegas. I'm
They
sorry.
spent more time in Las Vegas than they did in Los Angeles for
Really?
months on end.
Yeah. And this, you know, I think so essentially, and a lot of those illegal payments and trips and all of that stuff came because big developers in Los Angeles wanted to seek influence in City Hall in order to get their projects built. One of the things I wanted to emphasize in talking about this issue is that what we're seeing in these FBI investigations is the illegal part of influence peddling, is the most egregious and kind of the criminal part of it. We see the legal part of it in many ways play out every day. And that is one of the reasons I chose to run against this particular council member, was because one of the things I did when I first thought about running was to look at his donor base. And he raised and spent a record-breaking amount of money in this election, over $1 million. It's more money than has ever been spent, I believe, in a city council race in LA. And the donor list read like a list of people who sought influence at City Hall. It was everybody from people involved in real estate. They may not have had active projects in front of City Hall at that moment, but they were involved in real estate in LA. Family members of people who had active real estate projects in front of City Hall, and employees, cannabis companies, styrofoam companies that were seeking to influence local elected officials to prevent local bodies from instituting styrofoam bans, which have been happening across America in response to the environmental concerns posed by this. Concert companies that wanted a contract at the Greek Theater. I mean, it was like a laundry list of people seeking influence at City Hall. And I think this is a real problem in Los Angeles that we need to address. I think that we can build a coalition of residents who care about the future of the city, who want better for the city. We do not have to be held hostage to those who seek influence here. And I think particularly in recent weeks, as we've talked about the influence of police unions on city council races and how that has shaped policy on police accountability and police brutality, we've seen that play out, I think, in more detail than we ever have been. We don't have to accept this. This is not something that, this is not a system that we have to accept. And we, in this campaign, we're not taking any donations from corporations or LLCs. We're not taking fossil fuel money. We're not taking developer money. We are trying to build a coalition of residents, of individuals who want a better city. And we were outspent 3 or 4 to 1 in the primary, and did almost as well as the incumbent, 41% to 45% of the vote, purely because of people power. I think that's a coalition that we can build on for the general as well. And that is the future we should be building in LA. May I say anything, Sarah or Hayes from my team?
Yeah, I can speak to a specific. I'm Hayes, by the way. I met some East Valley Indivisibles at a meeting earlier this year, but I can speak to a little bit around the way the donation system works. I've spent a lot of time in the council members' donor roles, and some of you may have heard an initiative that he put forward to ban donations from developers with active projects in front of the city. So what that means is if your name is on a development, you can't give the maximum $800 donation as an individual. But after he passed that ban, I was looking through his donations and I found for one developer in Sherman Oaks, who has a ton of projects in the city. His wife, his son, his other son, his employee, his employee's wife, another employee, that employee's wife, and his secretary all gave max donations at the same time. So the idea that this process has done anything to get real estate money out of politics is a sham. It's designed to make people think that they want this money out, but they're taking just as much of it as they ever have. And the only way to get it out is to do what Nithya and the campaign does, which is we spend hours going through our donations to give money back. Developer, I think Nithya had a college friend who was a developer, and where was it? Arizona? Miami. And we were like, we don't have to give this back, but we did. And like campaigns control what they take, and it's not hard to go through and filter out who might be trying to buy influence. Yeah.
And LA does have a good matching funds program, but I think we can push towards fully publicly financed elections. Obviously, PACs, or independent expenditure committees, as they're called at the local level, they have a Supreme Court supported right to exist, but I think we can do a lot more to reduce the influence of those who seek to profit from the city in our local politics.
Right. There's another question here. Scott, do you want to ask this question, or do you want me to ask it? I see yours is the next in the queue. It's your call. No? No? All right. I will ask it. I don't know if Scott can hear me. So the question is, your opponent recently sent out an online survey on public safety. Surveys like this, by their nature, exclude large swaths of constituents and give a disproportionate amount of power to a vocal minority. How will you reach out to constituents whose voices often go unheard?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott, and something that we've thought about a lot in this campaign. So I want to take a step back, because it's not a direct answer to your question, but I do want to talk a little bit about our approach to community engagement in the campaign, because I think it's representative of the kind of involvement that we want to have from residents, and the vision that we have for resident involvement on an ongoing basis. In the primary, we had a record-breaking number of volunteers. We had over 600 unique volunteers come out and volunteer for the campaign. We invested in a big field team as well. That's where all the money that we raised in the primary really went. And we knocked on 83,000 doors, which is, again, also a record-breaking number for a city council race in the city of Los Angeles. And we did that in places where when we knocked on their door, not only had people never knocked on those doors before, people didn't know, the majority of people did not know who their council member was in LA. In Los Angeles, city council races have had very low voter turnout. And, we really wanted to go to people and say, this matters, and here's how it matters for you. Here's how it affects your rent. Here's how it affects how you get around the city. Here's how it affects public safety. And we wanted to make it important for people. That is exactly what I want to do in office as well. I think we can do, depending on the issue, I think there's different ways of soliciting information that can transform the ways in which we currently solicit information. Scott, you and I talked about how you solicit information for transport issues, where you do public meetings, but you don't ask users of public transit what their needs are. And I think there are all kinds of tools, depending on the issue, on how you can break down the kinds of barriers that online surveys and public meetings and kind of meetings during the workday set up to real participation in City Hall. We've talked about some of these. We have a platform called Making City Hall Work for Us. We've talked about that a little bit, but actually in the general, we've done a lot more work in thinking through how those processes can change and get better. And we'd love your input on how we can improve those processes as well as we think through them. But I think going door to door, doing surveys out in the field, actually going out to places where people are instead of waiting for them to come to you, setting up meetings like the Zoom meetings that we've been having for City Hall right now through the pandemic have massively increased voter participation. And so that's obviously that doesn't address the issue that you brought up in your question, but just not having to force people to go to City Hall in the middle of the day to give public comment has transformed how people participate in local government. And so I think there's a number of tools that we could be using, and we'd like to utilize as many of them as possible to improve how we get feedback for public policies.
Right.
In planning school, we did like whole classes on this. Like, I think there's like syllabi that I have. It's outdated now, but like it's not rocket science,
Right. The next question is from Anita. Do you want to ask the question, or do you want me to ask it? Either way is fine.
I'll ask it.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
So how do you envision restructuring the system of, like, if there's 15 people that represent, do you have a vision for how to restructure the system and to create kind of a more holistic, compassionate government and housing system for Los Angeles? Like, if we get everybody involved, how do you envision, what's your city of the future? Yeah.
So I want to talk, I think it's easier to talk about this in terms of specifics. So maybe I can talk about one element of my of my housing and homelessness policy, which talks about how to restructure how we think about delivering services here in Los Angeles. Right now, as I described earlier, we have very few outreach workers not speaking regularly to people who are experiencing homelessness here in Los Angeles. We have LAPD as the primary point of contact between government and those experiencing homelessness. Now we've hired more outreach workers. So when I was at City Hall, there were 19 outreach workers for the entire city, that at a time when there were 23,000 people experiencing homelessness in the city of Los Angeles. Like, it's already, the gap was insane. And the numbers of people without homes only grew. Now we have more. We've been investing more in outreach workers. But even now, with the number of outreach workers that we've hired, even now, a recent study from City Hall found that over 2/3 of interactions between outreach workers and those experiencing homelessness happened during encampment sweeps, right? So those are moments when police is there, sanitation is there, and then there's an outreach worker that says, "Hi, do you want services?" At a time when your stuff is probably being thrown out, you feel terrified. It's not a moment to build trust with someone. What we talked about in the housing and homelessness policy was rethinking how we deliver services to those experiencing homelessness through developing a series of community access centers. So these would be neighborhood-based drop-in centers where you would have outreach workers, mental health support workers, housed in every neighborhood. It would be possible for those individuals to know everybody experiencing homelessness in their neighborhood by name. And through that, they would be able to be held accountable for moving those individuals along the pathway to getting housed. You could actually say, where is Joe who lives on this street? Where is he in that process? Right now, our system does not allow you to do that. We don't have that kind of visibility or accountability into the way in which services are being delivered right now. But building this around neighborhood-based services where those individuals are our primary point of contact between individuals experiencing homelessness and the government, I think would transform how we interact with unhoused residents here. These centers, you talked about compassion in your question. And I want to talk a little bit about compassion. We built a drop-in center like this, an access center like this in our neighborhood. It only operates 2 days a week. Just through volunteer energy, we built this at the Silver Lake Community Church. We have an outreach worker who comes there. Before the pandemic, our volunteer group used to pick up people from encampments, bring them to the access center, drop them off afterwards. And through getting to know those individuals by name and working with them over time, we were able to get many, many people into housing just through that time and attention. That access center also became a place where residents volunteered, where residents got to know one another and they got to know those experiencing homelessness in their own neighborhoods. It was a place through which we could exercise our compassion for one another in our neighborhood. And so I think it's not just limited to how can our city be more compassionate to residents, but how can we create ways in which residents can exercise their compassion for one another, which I think is evident every day when you go around Los Angeles. It is so evident. And we have seen it so much more in the past few months and weeks. And I think we can harness that energy to build a better Los Angeles if we try.
Rachel, do you want to ask your question or do you want me to ask it? You're welcome to.
Oh, go for it, Suju. Thanks.
You want me to do it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Rachel's question is, my number one issue is voter rights and voter access. I'm very passionate about pushing ACA 6, expanding voter rights to Californians on parole. Yeah, our group has been involved in that too. It's a great one. And what can you do as a member of City Council to increase voter access in Los Angeles?
So I think one of the biggest issues that I've seen here in LA, and I've talked about this already tonight, but I think our elected representatives have often hidden from residents. They don't tell them about what their powers are. They don't invite them into the process. They don't make voting. So it's not just about voter registration, which I think is incredibly important, and I would support those efforts in whatever way our office and a city council member can, and including potentially financial support for voter registration drives in our district or in neighborhoods across the city. But I think we could do a lot more to engage residents and make them kind of make it relevant for people to get engaged in local politics as well. We would, as we did during the primary through a campaign of voter outreach, I think we would continue doing that kind of voter outreach to residents, talking to them about civic issues, and really seeing part of the role of our local elected government as civic education. And so I think that would be a place where I think we could do a lot better than we are doing currently in our city to engage more voters and to make sure that not only are they registered to vote, but that they also feel that it's vital to vote and that it matters for them. But this is not an issue that I've given as much thought to as you have. And I would really welcome your guidance on what else you see a local representative being able to do to make sure that we can address this issue.
I don't know exactly what the powers are of City Council, but I do know like the issues that I care a lot about are the fact that people can't always get off work to vote. Now I know Los Angeles has done a lot to help with that, multiple days of voting, voter education. People have to take public transportation to vote, making public transportation free for the day. Childcare, I mean, those kind of access issues, a little more than like convincing people to vote, which is important too. But I think of like access for people with disabilities and low income, and making it a holiday, which wouldn't help everyone, but would help a lot. Making it automatic when you get a driver's license to be automatically registered to vote. But I know not all of that is necessarily up to City Council, but these are the kinds of
Yeah. And I saw a lot of we saw when we had volunteers at polling places across the city during the 11-day voting period. And what we saw on the last day was, I think, really disappointing. We saw incredibly long lines, incredibly long. I saw many, many people I was in Sherman Oaks at a polling place there. I saw older residents who couldn't stand in the sun, giving up and leaving. I saw residents who were coming from hourly jobs, who had taken a lunch break to come and vote, leave because they couldn't have voted in the time period that the line was so long. So we saw some real failures in this last, in the primary. And a lot of that is controlled by the county and the state, but this is definitely, thank you for bringing this up, and it's an issue that I will learn about and make sure that we're using the full powers of our office to ensure that people are able to participate.
Great. Noelle, Noelle has a question. Noelle, do you want me to ask it or do you want to ask it?
You can go ahead and ask it,
Yeah.
despite my awkward phrasing.
No, that's fine. Nothing awkward. All right. So Noelle's question is, will City Council be overseeing the restructuring of our budget changes? And can you speak more about that process? Can you tell us more about the role City Council played in the current budget? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a really good question, because to be honest, the budget process right now, hi Noelle, also, hi. So the budget process right now so essentially what happens at City Hall is that the mayor proposes a budget. The City Council has a month to make some changes to that budget, to make amendments, to ask for changes. Once they vote on it, which happens by the end of June, July 1st, end of May, they have a month to implement those changes, and then July 1st, the new budget goes into effect. Then every quarter, there's something called a financial status report, a fiscal status report, FSR. It's FSR for sure. I don't know what the F stands for. That's issued by the city administrative officer, where you look at what's happening in the city and then you make budgetary adjustments based on the new reality that you've seen there, right? So once you've passed the budget and you've started using the budget, you have 3 times when you can make adjustments to the budget. Right now, the budget process, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah. Okay. Joanne, let's see. Yeah, so what's going on with her?
I'm sorry, Joanne. I can move closer to my computer if that would help. This current budget process looks really different from the ones that we are seeing, that I have seen in the past. But one thing I want to emphasize here is that there was a month when the city could have taken significant actions to impact the budget, to instead made comments about, that they were angry about cuts being made to social services, or that they had objections to the size of the police budget, or whatever they wanted to make interventions on. They had that month. They didn't really do anything in that month. So that's just something I want to emphasize, because I think it was a real missed opportunity to talk about the budget at a time not just of I think incredible need because of the pandemic in departments which saw cuts, but also there's going to be more revenue shortages because of our current economic crisis. And so I do think that there was a real missed opportunity in our current budget to make it look more like what we needed it to look like, and what now they're trying to make it, respond to the protests and the uprising, to make it look more like, what protesters are calling for. Yeah, financial status report. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so City Council does have a huge amount of control in the budget. They didn't use it this time, but I think because we are in a kind of pandemic economy, they have an opportunity to continue making those changes. And I think there's opportunity to push them to make more powerful interventions in what the budget looks like over these coming months. I mean, I know it was a little bit confusing, but honestly, it does look very different from what I'm familiar with from the city. Others who are maybe more familiar on this call, is there anything that you want to mention? Yeah.
Can you explain, Nithya, can you tell us what your opinion is of how the city has responded to the COVID crisis so far, the council, like in terms of where we are, where we're heading, in terms of sort of reopening, how you feel like things are being handled?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different aspects of it, I think, that we could talk about. I think, but one thing, so let me talk about one thing which I want to just emphasize right now, which I think will be most important for this group, which is a group of very activated people, to keep in mind as we think over the next few months. I think that a lot of the most dire housing related impacts of COVID. So I think there was this real concern, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic when we went into lockdown, that people weren't going to be able to pay rent and that people would lose their homes. There were temporary eviction moratoriums that were passed in the state of California, more stringent ones that were passed locally. Because of the expanded unemployment insurance, which gave people an extra $600 a month if they qualified for it. It did not cover a lot of people locally, but it covered many. And because of the eviction moratorium that was in place, I think it is going to be now in July, after July, when expanded UI goes away, when the eviction moratoriums start expiring, that we will see some of the worst impacts of COVID and the attendant economic crisis. And so I would just say, like, what has felt like it's happening over the last few weeks is that, like, things are going back to normal in some ways. But I think that is a false sense of normalcy. We are seeing still huge amounts of unemployment, many businesses that have closed down permanently, many kinds of work which will not reappear for many months because of how schools are being restructured, of how home care is being restructured, because of how restaurants are being restructured. Those jobs are not going to come back. But the kind of urgency around protections for people that we saw is going away. And so I think it's on us as residents, as activists, as people who want to see protections for the vulnerable in place, to lobby for those to be stronger, to be maintained, and for more resources to be made available for residents. On the homelessness issue, for example, I heard that city shelters, there was new city shelters set up at rec centers across LA. Those are no longer accepting new residents. They're going to be shut down because rec centers are going to open up again. You know, the hotel program that was set up, the Project Room Key, that over the last few weeks has flatlined. They have not added new rooms. They have not added new people into those rooms. They promised 15,000 people in hotel rooms to respond to the pandemic, which has not gone away. People are still very much vulnerable to this illness. Mm-hmm. So I think it is on us as residents, as active residents, to continue to keep the pressure on our city to ensure that they are addressing the needs of those who are vulnerable at this time.
Right. Guys, other questions? Please feel free.
Yeah, or if I realized we didn't even get a chance to say, say.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, Marlene, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
Marlene.
on the radio, when I was driving home this afternoon, I heard, and I don't know if I have the numbers right, but the city committed to 6,000 new homes for the homeless at a cost of something like $60 million, for which they had funding for somebody. You'd have to look it up. I don't remember all the details, but it was 6,000 new residents for homeless to clean up the streets and the underpasses. And this was, I was in the car at around 4 o'clock on the news. So I can't commit to saying the right things right now, but I know it was 6,000 and something like $60 million that they were committing to that in the next year.
So my understanding, and again, anyone on this Zoom call who has more details, please correct me if I'm wrong. But my understanding is that it's not 6,000 homes, it is 6,000 shelter beds.
Yeah.
Shelter beds. So not units of housing, not apartments.
No, it was
just shelter beds.
Yeah.
That this is the result of a court case that is being litigated, where the city and county are both involved. Do people know whether this is 6,000 for the city and county together or just the city?
I think they only said the city, but I, again, don't trust me right now.
This thing I'm reading says the city will provide 6,000 new beds within 10 months.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And 700 more beds over 18 months.
Yeah, it was, they were initially planning to move people, the judge was wanting to move people near highway overpasses. But this is the new, this is the kind of the new settlement that came out of negotiations between the judge, the city, the county, and LASA. And so did you have a question with regards to this?
No,
or?
it was just that I had heard that. So I was just.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing. We need more shelter beds. Of the new shelter beds that came about as a result of COVID, they did expand shelter capacity. From the data that we've seen, those shelter beds have had 96% or 97% occupancy.
Mm-hmm.
So this really, I think, goes against the idea that people don't want to go inside. A lot of people, when I've gone out to residents to talk to them about the issue of homelessness, a lot of people say, oh, people don't want to go, people don't want shelter, people don't want services. What we've had in LA is just an incredible shortage of services, just a shameful shortage of services. And I think the percentages of people in these facilities and the occupancy rates really shows the need for these kinds of things. That being said, a shelter bed is not a long-term solution. It is not a home. It is at best a temporary solution. And I think it's a good thing that we will have more shelter bed capacity, but we should really be thinking about getting people into housing, into hotel rooms, into places where into apartment units, into places where they can live over the long term, and where they're not in congregate settings.
I have another question. What is the city doing, or do you have a plan to make sure that in November when we vote, we will have the right amount of places to go vote, and just to have a whole structure for voting? Is the city doing that? Do they have plans for it?
That is through the county. There's a county registrar's office that manages this, and I hope that they will do much better. Rachel, maybe you have a perspective on this, but who do we lobby with to make sure that that rolls out better than what happened in March?
Actually, Carolyn can tell you a little bit about that. She's been doing some work with the supervisors.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, tell us more, Carolyn.
I can talk to that. I was part of a coalition of groups that wrote a letter to the Board of Supervisors, and out of that letter came a relationship with all of the Board of Supervisors. Sorry, I've been keeping this muted while the dog. Honey, shh.
We like barking dogs. It's fun.
Yeah. And the report that was mandated was just talked about in the LA Times today in an article about what went wrong. So you can kind of read that article, and it outlines pretty accurately what we found went wrong in March. So who do you lobby? You lobby your local Board of Supervisor. Our district, that's Sheila Kuehl. But if you don't live, I'm not sure what the boundaries are for the different supervisors. So there's only 5 of them. They hold tremendous amount of power, and write and call them to make sure that they know your concerns and you want to make sure that they're on top of everything. The other person to lobby is Dean Logan, the county registrar. He's directly responsible for this. He reports to the Board of Supervisors, but he is the one who directly makes the decisions about how many polling places there are going to be, how many poll workers there are going to be, how they're going to train those poll workers, the degree of whether or not there are going to be backup systems. They are counting heavily right now on the fact that we are mandated vote by mail, and that every Californian is going to be sent a ballot in the mail. They are heavily counting on the hope that that means there won't be the same kind of problems because everybody will vote by mail. I think that that is optimistic and probably a mistake to rely on that. Nevertheless, they are. So I think that that is an issue that you might want to talk about. You know, the what ifs. They were very lax in planning for the what ifs. They were hoping that everybody would vote in the 11-day period, and they had not planned on the fact that it was a primary and people wanted to wait till the end because they didn't want their vote to be thrown away if they had voted for somebody in the beginning of the 11-day period who wouldn't still be on the ballot, which is actually what happened. So people saw that and everybody waited till the end. And even as they saw that happening in that 11-day period, they did not prepare for the onslaught that they knew would be coming by having more equipment and testing their equipment, making sure all the people were trained and everything. So Dean Logan is the one who is on the line here, who is directly responsible. And I would make sure that you contact him and tell him that you will be watching. But he is an appointed officer, and that is his job security. So you can't say, I'll be watching and I won't vote for you. But you can tell your supervisor that you will be watching for this issue in this most important election of our entire life.
Yeah.
And that you do vote for them. And that you will be voting on this and other issues.
So
one thing you make sure of that.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to echo was particularly for this group, I know many of you are from the Valley or live in the Valley. We saw incredible discrepancies in the kind of overcrowding and lines in vote centers across the district. So we had volunteers at every voting polling place across the city. Some had nobody. They had no lines. They had, you could get in, vote, and leave. In Toluca Lake and in Sherman Oaks, where I was, there were lines for 3+ hours. It was absurd. And so I think they badly did the Valley a disservice during this last election.
And they also had no system in place for those centers to communicate with each other so that they could say, well, we're crowded here. But since it's a county-wide system, you can go to Culver City if you want to drive 20 minutes and vote right again rather than wait 3 hours here. There was no communication set up for them.
And so and it was so funny because our campaign ended up doing that informally for people. So because we had volunteers at all the polling places, we were calling people and saying, is the lines long there? Are the lines long there? And we would send voters who came up to polling places to other places. We also put up signs at the old polling places, at every old polling place. So we thought people would go to their old polling place just by force of habit. And so we put up signs there that said, hey, this is not a polling place anymore. Hope you don't mind that we put this up there, directing them to that new polling place. Our voting system didn't do that, the registrar didn't do that, which I found there's so many improvements to make, but there were some really small ones that I thought could have been so much.
Their solution to this is not having somebody on the telephone. What?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, let's not get too in the weeds. We got a couple more questions coming.
Okay.
I was just gonna, I know it's.
Yeah, there's not having someone on the telephone, but adding another layer of technology that may or may not work. So, yeah,
for sure. I know she's passionate about it, which I appreciate. Yes. Another question. This is from Rick. Rick, should I just ask your question? Is that okay? Yeah. It says, I appreciate what you've done with SELA in our neighborhood. I know they're in Silver Lake and have volunteered. Would you try to do this throughout the entire district as a member of the city council?
Yeah, 100% yes. And I think I talked about that a little bit in the idea of the Community Access Center, but the whole campaign has really been about giving people a way to engage with their community. And they're, in the primary, what we saw was just an outpouring of interest in wanting to get involved with your neighborhood and with your neighbors. Something that we're trying to do in the general as well in different ways because we have to do it digitally and with less contact. But yes, 100%. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I've talked about this I talked about this in the policy document that we have on the website. But like one of my favorite things to do when this whole process has felt so abstract. Suju knows, like, I never thought I would run for office. I never thought I would be wanting to be an elected politician. It just was never in the cards for me. But the thing that like made me the happiest in thinking through what I like, why am I doing this? What would this be for? Is in thinking through how you could transform your district offices into places of community. So throw open those doors, get rid of that bulletproof glass, invite community groups to have meetings there, make it a place where you can drop off and pick up supplies, make it a place where you can come in and do tutoring for kids, make it a place where you can pick up, have a cup of coffee, just if you want some company. Like, I know we have some senior centers, but we have a lot of people, and I know, Rick, that you volunteer at the Wednesday night suppers, is that right, at the church? Yeah, Scott mentioned that. And like, we have a lot of older folks who come there, not because they are food insecure, but just because they want to eat a meal with other people. Like, why don't we have that space more widely? Why isn't that a part of what our city council thinks of its job as being, as, you know, building that kind of community? And like, that is the thing that makes me the most kind of hungry for this position in some ways, is not just to do all the big policy changes that we've talked about on the website, but also in smaller ways to build the kind of resilient communities that I know we can have in LA.
Great. We have another question. It's a local Silver Lake question. What are your thoughts about the Silver Lake Reservoir Master Plan?
That's a good question. You know, we live near the reservoir in Silver Lake, and I really want more access into the lake. I think I'm excited about being able to use it more. I have, as you saw earlier, I have 2 little ones. I would love for them to be able to have more park access. I would love for them to be able to use those spaces more. And I also think, like, LA is such a park poor city, that we need to use these spaces and really make them accessible, not just for our Silver Lake neighborhood, but for people from other neighborhoods to be able to come and visit it as well. So I like, have we finalized a version of the master plan? There were 3 different kind of things that we were voting on, right? In the last survey. And there were some different options around, like, what level of access we could have to the water, what level of access we could have to green spaces. I really like more access to green spaces, and would really welcome that in the neighborhood.
Any other questions from anybody? I know we've been on for about an hour, so it's up to folks if they have other things they want to ask. Well, what I was going to ask, if no one else has a question, is how can we, if we want to, which our group is doing, but how can we help your campaign?
Oh,
what can we do? Yeah.
Excellent question. Yeah, so we need help. You know, this is a very entrenched system in Los Angeles that is buttressed by corporate money, by people who don't want to give up their power. And so we can only win this election if we have your support. And we can, there's different ways in which you can support. You can volunteer with the campaign. We have a very organized team of people who are going to be phone banking, text banking, sending out postcards. Sarah is leading one of the field teams for that in the Valley. And we are eager and excited to have you involved in doing that work. If you've never done voter outreach before, it's actually incredibly positive. It's like it feels good to do it. And so we hope, if you have the time to volunteer, come join us and volunteer. Follow us and lift the message on social media. That's a very easy ask. We're at Nithya for the City on Instagram, Nithya V. Raman on Twitter, and Nithya for the City on Facebook. Spread the word about our policies. Spread the word about this candidacy. Every time you lift our message to your friends, that's $1 less we have to pay for advertising. So that's helpful. So please do that. The third is financial support. We do need money for this race. So if you are able to spare some money, we are actively fundraising for the campaign. And every LA resident, your dollar is matched 6 to 1 by the city. So up to $114. So if you give us $6, we get $36 from the city of Los Angeles. It's an incredibly good investment. And I also just wanted to brag for 1 second, which is that, we just did a how much each vote cost analysis comparing Rue's spend in the primary and our spend. And we are an extremely good investment. I think we cost like very little per $10 a vote or something. It's very good for the kind of race we're running. So it's a very good investment.
It is $10 a vote for us to $36 a vote for him.
Yeah. So, it's good. We use your money extremely effectively. And then the fourth is to organize a meeting like this in your own neighborhood. The best recommendation is if your friend tells you that I met this person, I want you to come and meet them, please vote for them. So either tell 10 of your friends or invite 10 of your friends to a meeting like this. And I would love to talk to them. I was telling Suju before this, I called her to ask her how she wanted to run the meeting. But I was saying, sometimes I feel overwhelmed because I don't have the answers. I don't know about every issue that faces the city. I know about a lot. But these are times when I can learn about issues too. So if there's an issue where you feel like our campaign hasn't done the work to address it, set up a meeting with people who care about that issue and teach me. We welcome that. We want you to do that. So if that's something that you're passionate about, let us know. So those are
passionate about. The reason I'm here tonight is because I've been very involved with David Rue for a long time on a different issue, which has to do with the Los Angeles Zoo. For many years, 25 years, but with David for about whatever his term has been. He's been very unresponsive, never calls back, neither do any members of his staff, to me and other people. So being responsive is really an excellent way to get people to like you and to vote for you. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, I hope that we try to be as responsive as possible to people's requests and to making sure that we're available to listen. And so I hope that we can continue to do that.
I'd like to add a little PS to that too. David is a traditional politician. He's come up through the city through the traditional path of working as somebody's staff and waiting till something opens up that he can running for it with the backing of the Democratic clubs and all of the incumbents in Democratic, because he's a known entity to all of them. So therefore his outreach has almost always been all of those traditional outreach avenues. He goes to neighborhood councils, he goes to homeowners associations, and he goes to the Democratic clubs. He may go to senior centers, I don't know, but I know that those are the places where he goes to outreach. He doesn't go to this whole other range of people who are active now, which are all of us activists in issue activism and in advocacy activism, like the Indivisible world. And that's the difference. That's a big difference, is where their outreach is and where therefore their feedback comes from. And that is also why real outsiders who do make those avenues are making headway in the political world. So I just wanted to.
See, it's very different with somebody like Paul Koretz, who I'm also involved, even though I don't live in his district. If you outreach and you get involved with him, you always hear back. He doesn't drop anything. So it's just the difference. That's why I'm saying that you could make such inroads by being responsive to your constituents. That's all.
And I wanted, and I take those points, and I hope that we can be as responsive as we need to be during the election and if we get in office as well. I want that's something that I want to do. I want to brag for 1 second about just how many more votes we got in this primary, because I think it's really important, particularly again for this group of activists to understand, because I think it shows the power of what is possible here. So we had, federal elections and municipal elections overlap for the first time. We knew in municipal elections there was going to be more voter turnout, right? That's part of the reason why the group of us who are involved in this campaign decided that we wanted to do this at this time. It was a real opportunity to say, let's increase civic engagement here in LA. And we really succeeded in the primary. So compared to other districts that voted at the same time, so all of them had this overlapping election, our district, because of the kind of intensive voter outreach that we did to progressive groups, to activists, and to people at their doors, in apartment buildings, in places where people had never been door knocked before, we saw an increase in our district. We had 76,000 voters in this district total, compared to 25,000 who voted in the last city council primary. So a huge increase from the previous city council, in the last city council general. Huge increase in the voter turnout just for in total. We got more votes in this district than in any other district across the city. So the closest district was CD12, that's Lorraine Lundquist's district. We got 11,000 more voters in this district than hers. And compared to other districts that were voting at the same time, we had 25 to 30,000 more voters come out in the city council races. And when we looked at the voter turnout data, we found something absolutely astounding for this district, which is that on the day of, in the polling place votes, more people voted in city council than for the presidential primary in our district. And that's huge. It is huge. So I just want all of you guys, because I know you are all activists, you are part of this change. And it's gotten so much bigger and so much deeper now in these last few weeks with these protests. I think we have a real opportunity to totally transform this city. And I hope that you can feel the power that we have right now as residents, as voters, as engaged citizens, because it is so inspiring to be just a tiny part of this incredible movement for change. And I'm very grateful to be in it with you guys.
Thank you. We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Great. So with everybody here, if you're interested, I took a picture just so I have your names, so I can follow up. If there's anyone who wants to follow up with to do a meet and greet in your own neighborhood, if you want to reach out to our campaign, just go to our website, nithyaforthecity.com, and sign up to be a volunteer. If you want to make a donation, the links are there, but I'll have Suju send out an email afterwards to people here. If we know, hopefully we'll have everyone. I know people came in through a variety of different means, but whoever we can find, we'll send you a follow-up email. And if you don't hear from us and you want to, just reach out to us. We'll get back to you.
They're very good with communication. So yes, for sure. So terrific. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming, and we're really appreciate your participation. Thank you, Nithya.
Thank you.
And
before we all leave, I
Yes.
would like to also make a pitch for our group.
yes.
Not everybody here is a member of our East Valley Indivisibles organization. And if you're interested in that, we welcome you. We're getting ready for the big election season push actions starting in July, August, September, October. Those 4 months, we are going to be heavily invested in doing whatever we can, however we can, whatever platform is possible for us to make change. So we need everybody involved. As we can do that and work for Nithya. They work together. So if you're interested in our group, please reach out.
We've been to a lot of meetings over this campaign, and East Valley Indivisibles is a extraordinary
Yes, it's a
organization.
great group.
Really
Thank
just
you.
and stands out
Yeah.
hugely.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. We will follow up with you all.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
You will.
Bye.